And Lazarus, who was carried away by the angels, is now in Abraham's bosom. Now this is the part of the story that I started out earlier saying that I haven't avoided the story because I don't want to get into a big dialogue about Hades and Sheol and hell and Gehenna and paradise and Abraham's bosom. It's not like I want to avoid all that, but it's really not the point of the story. We've got to remember, Jesus is looking at a bunch of guys who have put their faith and their trust in money. And so far, he has shown them a picture of a rich man whose faith and trust is in money, who doesn't even see the needy and the poor. He's blind as a bat. We think in terms of he's going to scare them so bad. They're, oh my goodness, I don't want to go to hell. No, that wasn't his point. He was just trying to show them, giving them an image of what they look like in their lifestyle, in their value system, in their love of money, so concerned about all this materialism. So he's telling them a story. I don't think it's a parable personally, although it starts exactly the same way as the previous parable. There was a certain rich man. I can see where greater Bible scholars than myself say it's another parable. I don't believe it is. In fact, I think the power of the story is the fact that when he says there was a certain rich man and a beggar named Lazarus, I think they're going, we know that guy. We just had dinner with him. And we know about Lazarus. The fact that Lazarus is never mentioned in John with Mary and Martha, and in Luke with Mary. Lazarus, he's totally out of the picture. All of a sudden he appears in John 11. And we say, well, who's this guy? And over here in Luke, Lazarus is mentioned, that with Jesus he is making kind of a parallelism about Lazarus and the lifestyle that he led, which is why you don't see him. Well, you know, people, you can have all kinds of conjecture on things, but it's hard to put all that together. But no, it's definitely not the same Lazarus, because he can't be alive, the one that went in. But the point is, I think there is a kind of a connection there, personally. I think that because Jesus did that, all the time. He's not messing with us. He's really kind of connecting the dots for us, because we never do. You've got a divide starting to happen, and I'm just saying it before we actually read the rest, which we're going to read. I don't really believe that the threat of hell, first of all, if you're a rich man, you don't necessarily go to hell. And if you're a poor man, you don't necessarily go to hell. We understand, I said it from the outset, that our destination was determined by Christ. And our faith in him is what it's about, regardless of anything else. So to make a suggestion that the guy ended up in hell because he was rich, or the guy ended up in hell because he was selfish, the only way that the guy ended up in hell was that he didn't put his faith in God. His faith was in his money and himself. He bought himself a ticket there. Likewise, Lazarus, being in Abraham's bosom, shows his name meant God is helper. There's something about this brother that he trusted God. His faith was in God. He was in a terrible situation, but a lot of people look at their situations as being unfair or unjust or something like that. That, I'm a child of God, I this, I that. We need to read the book. There's a lot of children of God, people of God, that did not have great lives. And they were sick, and they were ill, and all kinds of problems in their lives. If we've got a Santa Claus view of God, we've got to repent, because he didn't give us that one. He made that clear. We've extended his promises and made some charismatic thing that just isn't true, and it's not helpful when you're going through a problem. When you're in a hospital, now you got two problems. You got a disease, and you got a God that threw the towel in on you. Instead of saying, no, that's not what this is about. There's a definite contrast in death here. There's like a role reversal. You can feel it and see it. When you get to Exodus 4, it's at the burning bush, and God says something here in chapter 4, verse 11, that I want you to listen very carefully. This is the Lord speaking to Moses after he has said, you got the wrong guy. I don't talk so well. I'm not very eloquent, and I got a little bit about.
Then the Lord said to him, who made a person's mouth, and who made someone deaf or not able to speak, or who gives a person sight or blindness? It is I. The Lord, now go. I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say.
Boy, that's a thought, isn't it? That'll knock you right off your horse. So who made them? Who made their mouths? Who made them blind? Who made them deaf? I'll tell you what, our 21st century theology goes right down the tubes. Now you'll never hear that preached, I guarantee you. That actually God takes the credit and says, your focus is so screwed up, I can't believe it. No, he doesn't say that, I say that. Your focus, you need to open your eyes and see the greatness of God. Because I'll tell you what, when a blind man filled with the Spirit says, watch out, that car is going to hit you. If he could see, it would be a meaningless warning other than say, oh, thank you very much. When a blind man says, watch out, there's a car that's about to hit you. If I didn't make him blind, he couldn't do that. If he didn't do that, then you wouldn't go, what? How did you do that? God told me. Work through that one. God's got such different divine design and plans. Ecclesiastes 7. Please read verses 13 and 14.
Consider the work of God, for who is able to straighten what he has bent? In the day of prosperity be happy, but in the day of adversity consider. God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not discover anything that would be after him.
That's why it's one of the wisdom books. I go, what? The point we're trying to make with this is that this whole idea of if you're wealthy, God's favor is upon you. And if you're poor, God's favor is not upon you. Well, God's favor is on both of you, quite frankly. And one of you has money and the other one doesn't. We don't look at wealth, money, and prosperity as a sign of whether God's favor is on you or not. And when someone is poor and is kept in a poor state by God, between the scriptures, we're saying, but God has a divine plan for your life that is beyond the money part of it. If you need money, God will give you money. If that's what you need to fulfill His plan. I mean, whose plan is it about? What is this actually about? Now, this is probably a conversation for another evening because it's a huge subject. But I'll tell you what, it's only a huge subject in America, which right away should be sending off bells. We're the only Christian nation in the world that even is concerned about this subject. No place else, in Africa, in Europe, in Asia, these are not subjects or topics because they realize that they're absolutely irrelevant. That only in a country where you're struggling with serving God and money does it become a subject. Hades and Sheol are the same thing, Hebrew or Greek, and Hades is made up of paradise, where the people who were saved, or the righteous people, whatever, were held until Christ went, in Ephesians 4, Psalm 68, when Jesus went and took them all out of paradise and brought them to heaven. Paul says to be absent from the bodies, to be present with the Lord. So Jesus dealt with that following the cross. We've got that. So now all those people, what he's talking about now, Hades being in two parts, isn't like that anymore. But when he's telling the story, it was. So Lazarus goes down into Abraham's bosom, not for long, because within a short period of time, Jesus is going to go get him out of there. But the people that were in the part of Hades, which is often referred to as Gehenna, that part of Hades still exists. For our purposes here, we're very clear where Lazarus ends up and we're clear where the rich man is. It brings me to another excerpt by Mother Teresa. This is part of the letter. I wish I could get the whole letter. This is a couple sentences out of the letter. It'll give you the idea of what she wrote back. She said, I felt like a fish out of water in that crowd of businessmen and leaders. I never feel like that with crowds much greater, but closer, of our kind, the lepers, the dying, the unwanted, the helpless, the unloved, the lonely. She never feels like a fish out of water with them. She felt like a fish out of water with the businessmen and the leaders from all over the world. If we could finish this up, verses 23 through 31.
In Hades he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and saw Abraham far away, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried out and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus so that he may dip the tip of his finger in water, and cool off my tongue, for I am in agony in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that during your life you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus bad things. But now he is being comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you there's a great chasm fixed, so that those who wish to come over from here to you will not be able, and that none may cross over from there to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, that you send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, in order that he may warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment. But Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. But he said, No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, then they will repent. But he said to him, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be persuaded, even if someone rises from the dead.
I think what we want to, kind of get out of it, there's maybe a few things in the second part of the story, and then we'll wind it up. It's obvious by what Jesus is telling us that there is a state of consciousness in a place. In other words, you can hear there's a conversation taking place, there's feeling of torment. There's a state of consciousness, and there's also fixed boundaries, fixed separation. There's a separation between the righteous and the unrighteous, Abraham's bosom and Gehenna, if you would. It's fixed. Send Abraham over here. Can't do it. There's a fixed gulf between us. Nobody goes back and forth. And then later on, when he says, okay, well, if I can't have any relief for me over here, well, then you can send somebody back up to earth, to the surface. Lazarus, send him up there to warn my brothers, which is kind of a nice thing. It's the first time in the whole story he's thinking about anybody but himself. But again, Abraham says, well, that ain't going to happen either. We don't send anybody back. But surely if someone goes back from the dead, they'll listen to him. Now we know otherwise, because Jesus comes back from the dead. In fact, it's funny, because Lazarus that you mentioned before, when you read the story in John 11 and 12, in John 12, it clearly says how he's sitting at the table with Jesus after he's been raised from the dead. And some come to see and talk with Lazarus, and the Pharisees and the religious leaders want to kill him. So he's not exactly 100% hit here with people, even if someone from the dead comes back. And that's why I think there's a little bit of play going on here with Jesus and the story and the whole thing. But it's part of it.